So as I mentioned at the beginning of this Mass, this is a collection of readings that speak about what we call the social teaching of the Church. The idea of, in the gospel, and because Jesus Christ came, he has given us a way to love our neighbor as ourselves. And how does that work out in all the different human and national and international ways in which we're called to love our neighbor as ourselves? And I would invite you to think about this balanced way of looking at a civic institution, governmental structures, things that have been established to help order and promote unity, and to not fall into two extremes, not to demonize the human institution, the civic institution, and not divinize the human or civic institution. Usually, in that mean between two extremes is where you find the virtue. So first, this second reading really speaks against a tendency to demonize the civic institution. St. Paul is reminding us to have supplications, so sacrifices, prayers, petitions, thanksgivings be offered for everyone, but notice who he points out in particular: for kings and for all in authority, that we might lead a quiet and tranquil life in all devotion and dignity. And he talks about later, he's like, my desire is that the men of this place should pray lifting up holy hands without anger or argument. And so there's this call of praying for those in authority, praying for the very civic structures themselves to be used to promote a quiet and tranquil life so that we can grow in devotion and we can grow in dignity. One of the tendencies within our own particular society, but it's something that comes at different times, is this idea of demonizing the civic institution. An older example of this, I just finished reading Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, and it speaks about the French Revolution. You had very broken structures during that particular time of French monarchy. But the sad response in that rage was to say, we're going to cut everything out. We are literally going to decapitate all of these institutions of tradition, and we're going to establish something else that will be all about equality and fraternity and unity or death. So it's like all these things, but if you don't go along with it, then we're going to guillotine you. And ultimately, if you study that history, you'll notice that the very people that started that, then it turned against them because everybody started suspecting everybody, and it became a mob rule. And if someone accused someone and they just wanted to get into the whole spirit of it, then they would have this person off with their head. And it went around so that the very leaders of that Jacobin revolution actually lost their own heads. So it's this whole idea of what Christ is calling us and has called through the church in so many different ages, that we are called to heal the institution that's broken, but not cut it away as though it were a weed, because it's been given to us, as flawed and broken as it can be at times, to promote this harmony of the common good. I think a modern day example of this that was very, very troubling, and was probably troubling for many of you, was during this time of 2020, and we had the very visceral reaction to some grave abuses in the midst of law enforcement. But the response, instead of saying these things were wrong and there needs to be healing and responsibility and all those things, it was, remember the expression was, defund the police. It wasn't, let's look and see, are there places that can be healed, places that need to grow in different ways in our society, but it was, let's just cut the whole thing out as though it were a weed. That's the demonizing of human civic institutions. And we know what happened in the midst of that. The fruits of those situations that really went into those and really said, we're going to defund it all, we're just going to create some kind of citizen watch aspect, it actually worked the opposite way. It was actually rather like the French Revolution, in which crime started to increase more, and it started to just spiral out. And many of those places had to go back on that to say, maybe this actually wasn't a good idea. So St. Paul is reminding us that we have been called a pilgrim people that are not made for this world. We're made for heaven, but as pilgrims, we enter into society and we want to renew it, not chop off its head. And so the church has always been on that side of what is it to promote the common good and to uphold very important institutions and structures to be able to promote a common, tranquil life. So that's one side of the equation. But in the first reading, the book of the prophet Amos is the other side. Don't divinize the human civic institution. And this is actually something that both Judaism and Christianity really became a very different force in the ancient world, because if you study the Romans or the Greeks or all these different civilizations, the Egyptians, all of these ones, if you look at their writings, they really take their leaders and they put them on a level of like a god. Caesar could do nothing wrong. He is always right. And his Pax Romana, his peace of Rome, will go forth to be able to always promote what is good and righteous according to his mind. But we know many of those Caesars were quite broken. But the literature all kind of lifts them up. And if anyone says anything to the contrary, off with their head. Amos comes in. And the book of the prophet Amos is actually one of those that was most quoted by Martin Luther King Jr. If you read a lot of his speeches, he's actually taking word for word the book of the prophet Amos in so many different ways. And we see Amos in the spirit of Judaism that Christianity also inherits, is the phrase, speak truth to power, but this is actually where it started in the right sort of way. Whereas all other civilizations, they all said, our king, our emperor is godlike, he can do nothing wrong. Here you have the prophets speaking about the injustices that the society is contributing towards against the poor, and particularly the leaders who should know better. Hear this again. It says, you who trample upon the needy, you destroy the poor of the land. And then it has this quote from the people who are doing this saying, when will the new moon be over? So that we can get back to business. So the idea of when is the Sabbath over? When is Mass going to be over so that I can actually get to like the business stuff? I can get back to work. I can start making the profit and stuff like that. Isn't this something kind of in our culture? It's kind of like I'm doing this. I'm kind of doing the minimum, and then I'm getting back to real life. Versus real life should actually be here, in union with the Lord, so that he fuels us to be able to live out a discipled life in the midst of society. So then it goes on saying, we're going to diminish the ephah. That's a measuring rod. It's a piece of measurement. And so we're going to shrink that down. We're going to add to the shekel. We're going to make the weight of this coin more precious. We're going to inflate it. We're going to fix our scales for cheating. We're going to fix our scales for cheating. Isn't this something that's like the 11th commandment? Don't get caught. That's sometimes the way that our society, we kind of go along with. As long as you don't get caught, there's kind of this unwritten rule that if no one else gets hurt and everything kind of goes, well, yeah, I can take a little here, I can change the figures here, I can do these different things. And as long as I'm not caught, then somehow I haven't done anything wrong. Everybody's doing it. So why not me? Then it goes on, and this is the most terrible part. It says, we buy the lowly for silver and the poor for a pair of sandals. Does anyone here have sandals, have flip-flops when you go to the beach? Okay. Imagine going up to someone with that flip-flop and saying, you're actually worth this. And we might say, I don't do that. That's horrible. But, I heard a story recently of a woman in New York City, a homeless woman. She was out on the streets, and someone was interviewing her. Someone actually took the time to talk with her, to find out what are her fears, what are her joys, like who is she as a person? And she said, the news person was saying, is there anything that you would like people to know? Something that we can share with the world. And she said, a couple weeks ago, there were signs out for a lost dog, cute little dog, little Chihuahua. And the entire neighborhood in the city was going everywhere. They're searching, they're trying to find this little puppy Fufu. And they find the dog. And there's a giant celebration. Everyone is hugging each other. Everyone is like, oh, this is so amazing. And she said, everybody walked by me. She said, that makes me feel like. She used a little more crass words, but she said, I feel like I'm worth less than a dog. Does anyone care about me? And it's something for us to think about. Again, we're not called to this demonic spirit of the French Revolution to cut everything from the roots. That is not what the Lord's calling, because that always leads to more destruction and anarchy. Anarchy is not of God, who is the source of all order. But we have to really look at the structures that do exist, at our own lives, and the way that we look at one another. The way that we as a people maybe look at our economic system. Is it something that is helping those most vulnerable? Is it providing a space to be able to provide a more generous response from our heart to be able to serve others in need? Remember that communism is not the answer, which is saying, I am forcing you to take this and you are now giving it to the collective. That never works because it's not from the heart. But are there things within our society that are promoting a kind of clinging, a kind of greed, a kind of profit is all that matters? And are we in fact maybe selling the poor for a flip-flop? Next week we're going to hear the story of the rich man and Lazarus. And the rich man goes to Hades, and it's not because he kicked Lazarus or anything. He knew Lazarus' name, but he actually just didn't care. He didn't do anything, and he just kept feasting all of his surplus without recognizing that he's been given this for the call to serve others. To use his energy, his talents, his wisdom, his material possessions, not to make himself bigger, but to actually be a servant to others, to stand in the gap for those who can't stand up for themselves. And so maybe this week we could maybe meditate on that question. Where am I selling the poor? Where am I selling my neighbor? Where am I selling the person that is in my family or wherever? Because remember, there's different kinds of poverty. And yet I'm looking at them and saying, the sandal's actually better than them. And if we look deep in our heart, we might actually find a troubling revelation of some deep selfishness that the Lord needs to heal. I'm preaching to myself and to all of us here. So let's ask the Lord that we can allow the gospel to break open the shell of our selfishness and to be able to take, like the parable today, the person who has the dishonest wealth. It's always going to fail. Dishonest wealth here means the things of this earth. It's always going to fail. So if you're clinging to it, then how are you going to be able to hold on to true wealth, which is something deeper, which is the richness of knowing the Spirit of the living God and being able to proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord? So let's not cling to the things of this earth, our time, our talent, our treasure, all these different things, our relationships. Maybe that's a way in which we are utilizing others for our own gain, to be able to say emotionally, this person feeds me at this moment, but the moment that they don't feed me anymore, then I could just throw them away. I can just put them in the trash like a Tupperware that I don't really need to use anymore. And so I just invite you to think about, where are the many dimensions of the human person, in our mind, in our soul, in our body, in all of these things, and how do we heal the institution and structures, starting with ourselves and being leaven within them versus tearing them down? The balance is always in between, but it needs to challenge us and shake our heart when we are in the middle.